love, self-discovery, and the turbulent journey of growing up. Sometimes, life's most unexpected twists leave lasting marks on our hearts. Today, I'll share a story of youth, innocence, and a forbidden bond that etched itself into the soul, shaping everything that followed. But before we dive into this emotional tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It's your support that keeps me creating more stories like this. Now, sit back, relax, and let's begin. My name is Lily, and today, I'm sharing a tale I never thought I'd find the strength to tell. It's not just a story, it's a confession. An unveiling of a chapter of my life that remains etched into my soul like a scar that never fully heals. It's a tale of choices, emotions, and moments that the heart clings to, even when the mind struggles to comprehend or accept them. This story is not one of simple heartbreak. No, it's far more than that. It's about the kind of relationship that consumes you entirely, that pulls you into a vortex of emotions so deep and tumultuous you barely recognize yourself. It began as an innocent spark, a playful connection that should have been fleeting. But it grew into something far more complex, dangerously intoxicating, and ultimately, all-encompassing. Looking back, I realize that my life has never been conventional. I was always the one who colored outside the lines, the rebellious child who couldn't conform to the rigid framework my father tried so hard to impose. He was a man of unrelenting discipline, a force of authority who believed in molding every aspect of my existence according to his vision. It wasn't a childhood of warmth and understanding, it was one of constant expectations, relentless criticism, and the suffocating weight of his control. By the time I turned 19, my father's demands had become unbearable. It was during one of his lectures, this time about my lack of direction, that he proposed I spend the summer with my Uncle Michael. At first, the idea felt like a lifeline, an escape from the oppressive environment I had known my entire life. Michael, my father's younger brother, had always been an enigma to me. He was the family's black sheep, a man whose life seemed to defy all expectations, while others settled into predictable routines. Michael remained a wanderer, a free spirit who carried an air of mystery wherever he went. Growing up, I idolized him in a way only a child could. His visits to our home were like bursts of color in a world of gray. He brought with him stories of far-off lands and peculiar cultures, stories that made my imagination soar. He had an uncanny ability to make the mundane seem magical, and his presence was always accompanied by unusual trinkets and exotic souvenirs. But that summer, things were different. I was no longer the starry-eyed child I once was. At 19, I was discovering the world, and myself, through a new lens. And for the first time, I began to see Michael in a way I never had before. The moment I arrived at his apartment in the city, I felt it, a shift in the air that was almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore. At first, I chalked it up to the sheer relief of being away from my father's oppressive gaze. Michael's apartment was a stark contrast to the rigid atmosphere of my childhood home. It was eclectic and full of life, with books stacked haphazardly on shelves, artifacts from his travels adorning every corner, and sunlight streaming through oversized windows. Yet beneath the comfort and freedom, there was something else, a tension that I couldn't quite put into words. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, a product of my overactive imagination. But as the days went by, my feelings grew more complicated. Michael wasn't just my uncle anymore, he was a man with layers I was only beginning to uncover. There was something about the way he looked at me, his gaze lingering a moment too long. His eyes filled with a depth that seemed to speak of things left unsaid. It was intoxicating and unsettling all at once. The turning point came one afternoon as we walked through the park near his apartment. The city hummed with life around us. But the air between Michael and me felt charged. Like the calm before a storm. The silence was thick. Not with discomfort but with an unspoken connection that neither of us could deny. It wasn't the kind of tension born from conflict, it was quieter. Deeper. And far more dangerous. It was as though every word we exchanged carried the weight of something we weren't ready to face. Michael, usually so full of life and wit, seemed unusually subdued that day. His laughter, which usually rang out like music, was absent, replaced by a contemplative silence. Unable to bear it, I finally turned to him and asked, "Why are you so quiet today?" My voice was light, almost teasing. But inside, I was desperate for an answer. He glanced at me, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment. And in that fleeting instant, I felt as though I could see straight into his soul. But just as quickly, he looked away. His expression shuddered. "Nothing," he said. His voice tinged with an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. "I'm just tired." But I knew it wasn't the truth. There was something simmering beneath the surface. Something that neither of us could name but both of us felt. From that moment on, our time together grew more intense. The small, seemingly innocent moments, his hand brushing against mine, his lingering glances, took on a significance that left me reeling. I told myself it was harmless, that we were simply two people enjoying each other's company. But deep down, I knew better. Every moment we spent together felt like walking a tightrope. The ground below a chasm filled with consequences I wasn't ready to face. The attraction between us was undeniable. A force that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. A connection that felt both exhilarating and forbidden. And though I tried to suppress it, to convince myself it wasn't real, I couldn't escape the truth. I was falling for him. One evening, after a quiet dinner, we settled into the living room. As we often did. The comforting warmth of the apartment wrapped around us like a familiar blanket. And the soft, amber glow of the lamps cast long, gentle shadows on the walls. It was a scene we had shared countless times. Yet tonight felt different. An intangible energy seemed to hum in the air, weaving through the silence like a whisper of something unsaid. Michael poured another glass of wine. His movements deliberate. His gaze lingering a little too long. Then, instead of taking his usual seat across from me, he walked over and sat beside me on the sofa. My heart stuttered, caught off guard by the unexpected closeness. I forced myself to remain still, to feign indifference, though my body betrayed me with a rush of heat and a racing pulse. The space between us felt electric, as if the air itself had become charged. I could sense every movement he made, every shift in the cushion beneath us. Then, it happened, a simple brush of his hand against mine. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a shiver through me, like a match striking a spark. I turned to him instinctively, searching his face for some sign that it had been an accident. Something to anchor me in the rational. But his expression remained calm. His eyes steady and unyielding. It was then I understood, the moment had been deliberate. Michael knew. He had felt it too, that invisible thread of tension that had been winding tighter between us. The room seemed to hold its breath. the distant hum of the city outside becoming a quiet reminder of a world that no longer seemed relevant. From that night forward, the dynamics between us began to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. The stolen glances grew heavier with meaning. The silences stretched longer. And every casual touch carried the weight of unspoken emotion. What had once been easy and familiar now felt loaded with an intensity one couldn't escape. Michael's presence became a storm. One I couldn't seem to outrun. I was both drawn to it and terrified of what lay at its center. Days turned into weeks. Each moment with Michael laced with an undercurrent of something unspoken. It was as though we were caught in an intricate dance, circling closer with every step. The tension was both thrilling and unbearable. A mixture of desire and fear that left me feeling unmoored. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just an overreaction to the ordinary. But deep down, I knew better. This was anything but ordinary. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Thick clouds rolled in, heavy with rain. And within moments, the heavens opened. The downpour was sudden and relentless, drenching us before we could find shelter. Laughing breathlessly, Michael grabbed my hand, leading me toward a small greenhouse nearby. It was a place he often visited. A quiet retreat where he could read and reflect. Now, it became our refuge from the storm. Inside, the scent of damp earth and rain enveloped us. The dim light filtering through the glass created an almost ethereal glow, turning the space into something out of a dream. We were soaked, our clothes clinging to us. But the chill of the rain was forgotten in the warmth of Michael's presence. He handed me a towel he had stored there, his fingers brushing mine as he did. The touch lingered just a moment too long, sending a ripple of awareness through me. As he began to dry my hair with a gentle, almost reverent care, I felt my breath catch. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. The air between us thick with unspoken words. I looked up, meeting his gaze. And the world seemed to shift. The rain outside became a distant rhythm, a backdrop to the magnetic pull drawing us closer. Michael's eyes held mine. And in them, I saw everything he wasn't saying: desire, hesitation, and something deeper, more consuming. Without a word, he stepped closer. And before I could think or protest, his lips met mine. The kiss was soft at first, a tentative exploration. But it quickly deepened, fueled by a passion that had been building for weeks. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer. And I let myself be carried away by the moment. It was as though the storm outside had found its mirror within us. An uncontrollable force that couldn't be denied. In Michael's arms, I felt both a profound sense of safety and an intoxicating danger. It was a paradox I couldn't unravel, a place where I was simultaneously lost and found. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that we were crossing an irrevocable line. But my heart refused to listen. In that moment, all that mattered was the way his kiss made me feel alive in a way I hadn't known was possible. The days that followed blurred into a series of stolen moments, each one more charged than the last. The greenhouse became our sanctuary, a secret world where the outside couldn't intrude. But even as our connection deepened, so did my internal conflict. I told myself it was fleeting, a passing infatuation that would fade with time. Yet, with every touch, every lingering glance, the lines between right and wrong dissolved further, leaving me adrift in a sea of emotions I couldn't control. Our bond grew stronger, more undeniable. But so did the weight of the consequences we were risking. Michael and I had created a world of our own. One where rules didn't apply. Where the intensity of our feelings eclipsed everything else. And as the summer began to wane, I couldn't help but wonder if the storm we had unleashed would leave us shattered, or if it would transform us into something unbreakable. The reality I had been avoiding slowly crept in, tightening its grip on my thoughts as if it had been lying in wait. My father was coming to pick me up. And with his arrival, the fragile world Michael and I had built would inevitably shatter. Both of us knew that this day would come. We couldn't hide from the truth forever. But knowing didn't make it any easier. The fear of being discovered hung over us like a storm cloud. Heavy and unrelenting. Threatening to expose the secrets we had tried so desperately to bury. It wasn't just the fear of my father's judgment or the shame that loomed over us, it was the fear of losing each other. Of losing what we both knew we could never truly have. Every time I tried to put distance between us, to convince myself that this was a chapter one could close, Michael's presence had a way of drawing me back in. His warm, unspoken glances. His quiet gestures. The way his voice softened when he said my name, all of it bound me to him in ways I couldn't explain. It felt wrong. But it also felt inevitable. Like we were caught in a current too strong to escape. Then, the day arrived. My father, ever punctual and unwavering, came to take me home. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind so many times. Imagining myself detached and stoic. Ready to leave without a second glance. But the reality was far from that. I tried to act normal, keeping my distance from Michael. But the tension between us was so palpable that even my father seemed to notice. His sharp, probing eyes flicked between us. His brow furrowing as if he could sense the unspoken connection we were so desperately trying to hide. That evening, the weight of it all became unbearable. After my father had gone to bed, I knew I couldn't keep running from the inevitable. Michael and I needed to confront what had been simmering beneath the surface. I found him in the living room, sitting by the window. The faint glow of the city lights casting long shadows across his face. He looked lost. The quiet melancholy in his expression mirroring the turmoil in my heart. He didn't look at me as I entered the room. But I knew he was aware of my presence. For a long moment, I stood silently, gathering the courage to speak. The words felt like stones in my throat, heavy and unyielding. "This has to stop," I finally said, my voice barely audible, trembling with emotion. Michael turned to face me, his gaze steady yet filled with sorrow. "I know, Lily," he replied, his voice low and resigned. "I've always known this wouldn't end well." His words cut through me like a blade, stripping away the last remnants of denial I had been clinging to. We stared at each other. And in that moment, the enormity of what we were losing settled over us. The memory of that summer, of the stolen moments and whispered confessions, would forever be etched into my soul. But it was time to let go. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the pale light filtering through the curtains feeling cold and distant, as if the universe itself mourned what was ending. I packed my belongings in silence, each item a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. When I stepped out of my room, Michael was waiting for me in the hallway. His presence felt both comforting and unbearable. A bittersweet reminder of what I had to leave behind. His eyes met mine, heavy with unspoken words. And for a long moment, we simply stood there, caught in the gravity of the moment. He stepped closer, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I hope you find peace." I nodded, tears threatening to spill but refusing to let them fall. Words felt inadequate, so I let the silence speak for me. We embraced one final time, the hug brief yet charged with everything we couldn't say. Then I turned away, each step down the hallway feeling heavier than the last, as if I was walking away from a part of myself. The car ride with my father was painfully quiet, the miles stretching out before us like a chasm I couldn't bridge. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past, and told myself I had to be strong. I had to move forward, to let the memories of Michael fade into the background of my life. But deep down, I knew the truth. No matter how far I went, no matter how much time passed, the memories of that summer would linger. They would haunt me in quiet moments, in the way a certain song or scent could bring back a flood of emotions. I wanted to forget Michael and the impossible love we had shared. But forgetting wasn't something I could will into existence. The memories were stubborn, replaying themselves in my mind like vivid snapshots, a stolen glance, a shared laugh, the way his hand felt against mine, as the car sped toward a future I couldn't yet see. I clung to one certainty: the summer with Michael had changed me. It was a chapter one could never erase. A love that was both my greatest sorrow and my greatest gift. Every glance, every lingering touch, and every whispered conversation between us had etched themselves into my soul like indelible marks on a fragile canvas. They refused to fade, no matter how desperately I tried to suppress them. Each secret encounter would resurface unbidden, stirring a tempest of emotions I thought I had buried forever. These moments weren't merely memories, they were living ghosts, haunting me with a mix of longing and torment that intertwined to form an unbearable weight. I was caught in a liminal space, torn between the necessity of forgetting and the aching desire to relive each stolen moment. When I returned home, I threw myself into the routines of daily life, hoping they would act as a balm for my fractured spirit. The passage of time was supposed to be my ally, helping me move forward. Yet, my father, ever perceptive, noticed the cracks in my facade. He didn't know what had transpired that summer, but his intuition told him that something was deeply amiss. At first, he hesitated, observing from the periphery. But as the days turned into weeks, he began to see the signs, the once vibrant chatter that had dissolved into silence, the smiles that no longer reached my eyes, and the quiet, reflective demeanor that had replaced my usual exuberance. His concern was palpable, and each gentle inquiry pierced through my armor, making it harder to maintain the pretense of normalcy. I wore my shame like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. I was ashamed of the person I had become, ashamed of the choices I had made, and ashamed of how far I had strayed from the moral compass that once guided me. My father's concern felt like a mirror reflecting my guilt back at me, exposing every flaw, every betrayal, every misstep. Time marched on, and the sharp pain of that summer began to dull, or so I convinced myself. The memories, though no longer searing, settled like embers beneath the ashes, dormant but not extinguished. Life resumed its rhythm, and I began to believe that I might finally be free of the hold those memories had over me. Then, one morning, a message shattered my fragile sense of equilibrium. A mutual friend informed me that Michael had been in an accident during a trip. Though not life-threatening, it had landed him in the hospital. The news hit me like a thunderclap, reverberating through every corner of my being. I tried to reason with myself, to silence the surge of emotions that his name alone could evoke. I told myself that I had no right to care, that I should let the past remain buried. But my heart betrayed me, and the ache I had fought so hard to suppress surged forward with unrelenting force. The thought of Michael hurt and vulnerable unraveled me in ways I couldn't explain, reigniting a pain that I thought had been long extinguished. I clung to logic, repeating to myself that it was for the best, that I had already made my choice, that the chapter was closed. Yet the feelings I harbored for him refused to disappear. They lay beneath the surface, raw and unhealed, a wound that time alone could not mend. Amid the turmoil, I made a decision. I would write him a letter, not to seek closure, not to rekindle what had been lost, but to unburden my soul. I poured my heart into that letter, each word an attempt to untangle the emotions that had held me captive for so long. I confessed the depth of my longing, the weight of my guilt, and the bittersweet truth of what we had shared, a connection as beautiful as it was flawed. Writing became an act of catharsis, a way to confront the truths I had avoided and to let go of the chains that bound me to the past. It was my way of saying goodbye, even as every fiber of my being resisted the finality of it. Once the letter was sent, I told myself to move on. I buried thoughts of Michael once more, determined to focus on the present. Weeks later, an envelope arrived. The sight of his handwriting made my heart race. As I opened the letter and began to read, his voice seemed to echo through the words. Michael had wrestled with the same emotions, the same guilt, and the same struggle to move forward. His words were honest and raw, a reflection of the pain we had both endured. He wrote about his regret, our shared mistakes, the paths we had chosen, and the consequences we now faced. But within the sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope. Michael spoke of his wish for us to find new paths, ones that would lead us to growth, healing, and perhaps a better understanding of ourselves. He believed that while we couldn't undo the past, we could learn from it, becoming stronger and wiser in the process. His words resonated deeply, a poignant mixture of sorrow and acceptance. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though we were standing together again, sharing the unspoken connection that had once defined us. But reality soon settled in, a sobering reminder that our chapter had truly ended. We had both made our choices, and now, all that remained was the path forward. Michael's letter became a turning point, a reminder that life's greatest lessons often come from our deepest wounds. Though the pain lingered, so too did the hope that one day we would both find peace, not in erasing the past, but in embracing the wisdom it had given us. In Michael's words, I found a profound mixture of solace and an undeniable, painful truth. His letter was more than just a collection of thoughts, it was a mirror reflecting what I had tried so hard to avoid acknowledging. The past, with all its mistakes and regrets, could never be undone. Yet, his words carried a quiet strength, a reminder that while the past was unchangeable, the future remained ours to shape. Michael's letter marked a turning point in my life, opening my eyes to something I had stubbornly refused to confront, the fact that what we often desire most isn't always what is best for us. That realization, as liberating as it was, cut deeply. Our actions, those driven by impulse, by passion, by fleeting emotions, had consequences that rippled far beyond what we initially imagined. We had crossed boundaries that were not meant to be crossed, and there was no way to undo the pain or disruption we had caused. Accepting that truth was painful. But it was also necessary for growth. I struggled for a long time to forgive myself. The weight of guilt was almost suffocating, pulling me down into a spiral of self-recrimination. Every choice, every action from that chapter of my life replayed endlessly in my mind. I blamed myself for everything: the hurt, the mistakes, the irreversible consequences. But slowly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, I began to understand that healing could never truly begin without self-forgiveness. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, but about finding the strength to let go of the guilt that had become a heavy anchor in my life. Michael's words, as painful as they were to read, brought comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. He, too, had wrestled with the same guilt, the same relentless battle to understand what we had done. But like me, he had reached a place of acceptance. His letter revealed that while our relationship had ended, it wasn't erased. Instead, it had become a part of us, a bittersweet memory etched into the fabric of who we were. It was a reminder of a time when love and desire burned brightly, yet carried with them the heavy weight of choices and consequences we weren't prepared to handle. Looking back now, I see how that summer, that intense and complicated chapter of our lives, shaped us in ways we couldn't have comprehended at the time. It was a season of love, of passion, of youthful recklessness, but also of profound lessons. Those moments, as exhilarating as they were, taught us the importance of responsibility, a lesson learned only through the pain of realizing how deeply our actions could affect others and ourselves. I am no longer the impulsive, rebellious person I once was. That girl, so quick to act without thought, so driven by emotion over reason, has evolved. The pain of that experience, the lessons learned, transformed me into someone more thoughtful, more aware of the importance of boundaries, loyalty, respect, and integrity. Values I once dismissed as abstract ideals now stand as the foundation of my choices and relationships. If there's one thing I hope others can take from my story, it is this: sometimes the greatest act of love is to let go. In the chaos of desire and passion, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters. Emotions can overwhelm reason, and in those moments of weakness, we risk crossing boundaries that should remain sacred. But love isn't just about following your heart, it's about respecting the limits that protect us and those we care about. It's about choosing responsibility over recklessness and understanding that our actions have consequences that ripple far beyond ourselves. Forgiving ourselves for the past is essential. But so too is learning to control our emotions, to recognize when to step back, and to nurture relationships built on trust and mutual respect. Sometimes, the bravest and most loving thing we can do is to walk away, not as a sign of failure but as an acknowledgement that true love is rooted in responsibility, not just passion. Letting go is often an act of deep respect, for ourselves and for others, a way to preserve what is good and honorable, even if it means parting ways. As I reflect now, I see how life's most profound lessons often come through the hardest experiences. It is in our darkest moments that we discover the strength to grow, the clarity to understand, and the wisdom to move forward. The importance of boundaries, the weight of responsibility, and the power of forgiveness, these are the lessons that have shaped me, not just as a person but as someone capable of deeper love, stronger relationships, and a greater understanding of what truly matters. And so, the story ends, leaving behind lessons to carry into a brighter future. For me, it's about understanding myself better, learning from mistakes, and moving forward with hope and strength. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care until then.